Okay, so we've all been there, right? You hit publish on a post at 11 p.m., and almost immediately the overthinking kicks in. You're refreshing your feed, you're scrutinizing your own words, and you just assume absolutely everyone is analyzing your every syllable. It's this heavy, super anxious feeling, isn't it?
And then, bam, that agonizing question hits you. Did anyone actually notice that? We are constantly wondering if people are judging our awkward moments, our slight stumbles, or those totally unpolished thoughts. Well, in this explainer, we're going to dive deep into the massive gap between the highly judgmental audience our brain imagines and the actual reality of the audience that exists.
It all really comes down to a fundamental truth about human consciousness. You are always the main character of your own life. Because we experience the world entirely from our own perspective, feeling our own heartbeat race when we're nervous or acutely noticing our own voice crack, we naturally but falsely assume that everyone else is just as hyper-focused on us. It's not arrogance at all. It's literally just the unavoidable architecture of how we experience reality.
Psychologists actually have a specific name for this. It's called the spotlight effect. It's defined as the consistent, measurable tendency for people to overestimate just how much others notice them. And the research proving this is incredibly revealing. It shows us that this blinding spotlight we feel beating down on us is, for the most part, a total projection of our own minds.
Let me tell you about one of the most famous studies on this, the Manilow experiment out of Cornell University. Researchers essentially forced a group of college students to walk into a room full of their peers wearing a highly embarrassing t-shirt featuring the face of Manilow. Pre-testing confirmed this was pretty much the ultimate social nightmare for these particular students, but before making their dreaded entrance, they had to guess exactly how many people in that room would notice the shirt.
The gap between their expectation and reality was just massive. The students were completely convinced that around 50% of the room would stare at their embarrassing shirt. But the actual reality? It was less than 25%. In fact, some people in the room didn't even notice that a person had walked in at all. The perceived attention they felt was wildly disconnected from the actual attention they got.
So why does this disconnect happen? Well, it's driven by a psychological quirk called the anchoring bias. This basically means we rely way too heavily on one single piece of information, our own intense internal experience, when we're trying to estimate how others perceive us. Our internal nervousness is just so loud, and it takes up so much mental real estate that we mistakenly assume everybody else can hear it too.
It is a literal tale of two realities. On the inside, your experience is loud, vivid, and completely all-consuming. But to the strangers sitting next to you, you are barely visible. Your anxiety is literally just background noise. Think about it. When you are sitting in a waiting room, you're usually rehearsing your own conversations, right? You aren't judging the stranger next to you. They are treating you as a background prop in their own mental movie because they are entirely occupied with being the star of theirs.
And that brings us to a super close cousin of the spotlight effect, known as the illusion of transparency. This is the false belief that your internal emotional state is visibly obvious to the people around you. It's exactly why public speakers falsely believe their internal panic is completely written all over their faces for the entire audience to see. What feels like an absolute meltdown on the inside usually registers as a totally normal presentation from the outside.
But here is where the psychology becomes a literal superpower. In a rare twist, researchers found that simply telling speakers about this illusion of transparency actually improved their performance. The moment they learned that their anxiety wasn't nearly as visible as they thought it was, they relaxed, and as a result, the audience rated them as appearing significantly more confident and credible. Literally just knowing this bias exists helps you defeat it.
Now you're probably wondering, if this mental habit causes us so much grief, why on earth did human beings evolve this way? We really need to remove the shame from this overthinking by looking back at our evolutionary history. Because, believe it or not, this hyper-awareness used to be a vital survival tool.
For the vast majority of human history, our entire social world maxed out at about 150 people. In a tight-knit village like that, your social reputation wasn't some kind of vanity project. Avoiding exclusion was a literal matter of life and death. If you were viewed as unreliable or weird, you could be completely cut off from food and protection. You basically had to assume people were always watching you, just to survive.
And that right there highlights the core issue we face today. Your brain is running on outdated survival software designed for an ancestral village of 150 people with incredibly high stakes. But you live in a modern world. You interact with hundreds or thousands of strangers every single week, where the stakes are actually incredibly low. Applying that village-level hypervigilance to a modern city isn't just wildly inaccurate, it's honestly just exhausting.
But I totally know the nagging fear you might still have right now. Okay, but what if I actually make a very real, very public mistake? This gets straight to our deepest anxiety. The idea that if we're seen failing publicly, if we drop the ball where everyone can see it, it's going to permanently define how others view us forever.
To figure that out, we have to look at this classic 1960s study by psychologist Elliot Aronson called the spilled coffee experiment. He wanted to see what happened when a highly competent, well-put-together person accidentally spilled a cup of hot coffee all over themselves. You'd probably assume this clumsy error would completely destroy their flawless reputation, right?
Actually, no. Instead of being judged harshly, their likability skyrocketed. Psychologists call this the Pratfall Effect. It's the tendency for interpersonal appeal to actually increase after a person makes a mistake. You see, perfection creates an alienating distance. It makes you seem kind of unreal. But a small stumble, that proves you are authentically, safely human.
Because, at the end of the day, humans connect with humans. So not only is your audience significantly smaller than you think it is, but the audience you do have actually likes you more, not less, when you drop the highly curated performance and just show up as a real, flawed person.
So, I want you to really think about this for a second. Think about everything you've held yourself back from over this past year. Asking a question in a big meeting, sending a risky message, walking into a crowded networking room, sharing a creative project, taking a class you might genuinely be bad at. Think about all those moments where you held back simply because you falsely calculated that some invisible audience would remember your failure.
Your absolute best tool for fighting off this outdated programming is surprisingly simple. Just name the bias. When you feel that familiar panic setting in, when that little voice tells you absolutely everyone is watching and judging, just pause. Remind yourself of the spotlight effect. Say it out loud if you have to. Simply naming it creates just enough psychological distance between the feeling and reality, allowing you to go ahead and take the risk anyway.
It is definitely time to step off that imaginary stage you've built in your mind. That massive, hypercritical crowd you've been so terrified of, it literally does not exist. And the few people who are watching, well, they're just busy figuring out their own lives too. So, keeping all of this in mind, what is the very first thing you would do today if you truly believed no one was watching?